Welcome to Security Take Two. I'm your host, Chester Wisniewski, and I'm here with my co-host, Ben Versharon.
This is episode 12, and we're doing Sony Part 2 today. It is the 24th of February, 2026. So we finished off the last episode, Chet, talking about a decade of interest in security incidents with Sony, and I think we're going back to June 2011 today to talk about LulzSec and an SQL injection vulnerability, which you have some first-hand knowledge in, right?
Yeah, I think this will be my first time partially repeating a story on the podcast, so my apologies to listeners right off the bat. But as you mentioned, we kind of wrapped up in the middle of 2011 in the first part of the podcast, and I'm optimistic that we're going to wrap this up in two podcasts. We weren't sure if this was going to be two or three because Sony's had quite a checkered record. But nonetheless, I think we can keep it down to two. And in this case, the actual incident began on May 27th, 2011. And if you'll recall, we had just wrapped up the last one talking about the first major Sony online entertainment breach, where there were some credit cards stolen. There was a massive outage of the PlayStation Network that disrupted people from gaming and that kind of stuff. And kind of not too far right on the heels of it was this on May 27th, 2011, when LulzSec, if you recall, kind of made their mark on Sony, and they breached some Sony websites. They actually breached a whole bunch of them. The main news stories were mostly about the Sony Pictures websites in this case, the ones advertising movies and contests, and also their music record label side of the business, if I'm not mistaken. So it wasn't the gaming part this time where PlayStation is. It was the part of Sony that's in movies and music and licensing. And a million accounts were breached in this. And I want to say that there were some weird stats, like the LulzSec stole 75,000 music codes, which I gathered to be like digital coupons, right? Like codes you could enter in on the website to download an MP3 of a song is kind of how I interpreted that. And they also managed to get 3.5 million music coupons, which again, I assume are like redeemable things to get a discount or a free album or that kind of thing. And it was all branded by LulzSec as Sonage, which playing on the concept of owning a zero WN a company or pwning them, but because it was Sony, calling it Sonage.
So this started with an SQL injection vulnerability in one of their websites, right? And you actually did it yourself, correct? Or you?
Well,
actually,
let's be careful how we phrase that. Let's call it a SQL injection attack in almost all of their websites.
Yeah.
And I did verify that one of their websites was in fact vulnerable to SQL injection. I at the time was writing for the Sophos security blog, Naked Security, and we were covering a lot of the LulzSec exploits, including FBI Friday, which was a thing at the time. This was all kind of in conjunction, if I'm not mistaken, with some of the Occupy Wall Street movement. There was a lot of social activism going on at the time, and LulzSec was kind of leading the way with their line drawing of a stick figure with a top hat and a glass of red wine. That was the LulzSec logo. And someone from LulzSec, I think it was Topiary, reached out to me on a direct message on Twitter at the time, kind of considering me to be part of the media, because myself and my colleagues were writing a lot of stories about all these hacks that were going on, saying, oh, by the way, we're going to post a big breach about Sony online entertainment in the morning, and Sony Pictures Italy is vulnerable to a SQL injection attack, and we'll send you the information if you'll cover it. And my response to that, as it always has been, is like, we don't give publicity to crimes and criminals, and I'd rather you not share any information with me about crimes you're committing. Like, I just don't want to be involved, and we don't do that. thank you very much for thinking of me, but go away.
Yeah.
And not really believing the person anyway, but they said Sony Pictures Italy. And so I went to the website, and in fact, I out of curiosity into the search box typed a very basic type of SQL injection. If you've ever done any training on how to do SQL injection, you often can use a backtick to escape or close the planned query that you're entering into a website, and then you can enter your own SQL commands directly to the database. And I did like the most amateurish possible thing. I went backtick or 1 = 1, which means whatever query you're searching for, or if 1 = 1, show me the record, which means dump the entire database, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because 1 always equals 1, it turns out, unless you're using an LLM, in which case they can't add, and I'm not sure if 1 = 1. But if in real life, 1 always equals 1. And when we had deterministic computers back in the 20 teens, I typed that in, and it did dump the entire database of Sony Pictures Italy, which led to a rather frantic evening for me, desperately, because I want to say this was happening around 10 or 11 p.m. on the west coast of the United States. So it was 7 a.m. or something in Italy, and I was desperately calling the switchboard. I don't know how else do you get a hold of the IT security team at Sony Pictures. I don't know how you do it, right? I'm just like calling the phone number for the front desk at the office, saying like, I need to talk to somebody in IT. I think you've got a problem, and you might have a PR nightmare in the morning if you don't do something about it. And yeah, so they breached a whole bunch of Sony Pictures websites, but the main one that they breached, they took all these codes. I think they got admin logins and passwords, and there was some kind of a Seinfeld contest or something that was going on, that there was a promotion, and they managed to steal all the information from the people that entered the sweepstakes. There was like 51,000 records in some sort of sweepstakes form that people had entered to win something.
Yeah, and so all of this was part of the 50 Days of LulzSec tirade that they went on as well. But this hack ultimately really put them on the radar. I'm assuming they already were. But the U.S. Justice Department, the FBI, really put their focus on LulzSec after this particular attack. They ended up getting charged for this attack, or most of the members of LulzSec did, or the main ones as well. So as a result, a lot of information was lost via the SQL injection attack. Sony always disputed how many records were actually leaked as well, so the actual numbers unconfirmed. But ultimately, it resulted in people pleading guilty and ended up in prison for it, right?
Yeah, including our friend Hector Xavier Monsegur, who was a member of one of the leaders at LulzSec, Sabu, who ironically friended me on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago. So another weird crossover to this story. I just out of the blue get a invite on LinkedIn from Sabu. And good on him. Apparently he's gone clean. He's run a legitimate security business now. He's straightened his life out. If you're interested in more information, you can go back and listen to our Security Take Two episode on LulzSec, which was, I believe, number 9. If you go to our website at Security Take Two, you can hear the entire LulzSec story, with the exception of Sabu sending me some LinkedIn love.
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous he liked you over more than me, but that's okay. These things happen. So
yeah, I'm not quite sure what prompted that, but I am genuinely happy to see when people manage to find a clear path forward. I don't always agree with their actions. I certainly can't endorse what Sabu did when he was committing his crimes, no more than I could endorse Marcus Hutchins and the crimes he committed when he wrote Malware for Criminals. But I am genuinely pleased when they're able to get their life together and use their skills for good, and it sounds like both of them have.
yeah, it's worth noting, like Sabu, he's got a podcast, or he had one, called The Hacker and the Fed. And I've actually found it pretty insightful. They covered some interesting topics and talk about it from both a hacker and law enforcement perspective. Yeah, he's living a pretty straight life now. So you live and you learn, I guess. It's good.
Well, let's talk about another group that seemed to be in it for the lulz. August 24th, 2014, Sony was not hacked, but I wanted to include this. They were impacted by another hacking group called Lizard Squad. And you may remember, I believe the Lizard Squad people dressed very similarly to our top-headed friend with LulzSec. I think it was a lizard in a tuxedo was their logo, because every good social hacking group of the time had a logo. And in this case, they actually called in a bomb threat against a flight that Sony Online Entertainment CEO John Smedley was flying on. He was actually on American Airlines Flight 362 from Dallas, Texas to San Diego, California, and called in a bomb threat. I mean, like, this is a serious crime and a super high risk thing to be doing that could put people in harm's way. Extra not endorsable, and unlike Sabu's crimes, I think much less forgivable. The plane made an emergency exit in Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. What I just thought was interesting that I wanted to include it in particular this week, Ben, is that the person who called in the bomb threat was a guy who went by the handle Zeekill, Zeekill, and that person's name is Julius Kivimaki. And Julius Kivimaki, most infamously, not like this is how screwed up this guy is. He's not known for the bomb threat, which is pretty dangerous. He's known for hacking Vestamo, which is a mental health institution, and stealing and publishing people's psychology records publicly in the Nordics, which is just deplorable behavior. And Joe Tidy at the BBC actually has a book out about Lizard Squad and Julius Kivimaki's hacks and exploits, and maybe this bomb threat. I haven't read the book yet. Control Alt Chaos: How Teenage Hackers Hijacked the Internet. So I'm really looking forward to Joe's book. These stories are always interesting to dive into, and in particular the misguided exploits of Lizard Squad. But that's just the beginning of this. We're going to come back to Lizard Squad in a few minutes, but like, they called it a bomb threat against the CEO of Sony. I mean, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, I didn't even have this on my radar till you highlighted it. And I always thought of Lizard Squad as just being a group that liked to do DDoS attacks. And then, while you and I were talking, I started reading about them, and they're far more intricate and complicated than just DDoS attacks. So that's an interesting one to probably do a full episode on in itself.
And like, all these groups, I don't know why we let them name themselves. They get to call themselves. I mean, we should, like, we had being somebody who's worked in the anti-malware space for a significant amount of time, like, the philosophy was always like, we name the malware, we don't let the criminals decide the name of it, right? Like, we intentionally want to deny them that power. And certainly in the old days, that was the way things worked in the 90s and 2000s. And I'm kind of a little irritated that they get to call themselves, LulzSec and Lizard Squad. And, well, let's move on to 24 November 2014 to the Guardians of Peace.
Yeah, the Guardians of Peace, aka the Lazarus Group. I think we can confidently say, without any real backlash, that they are very much part of North Korea, correct?
Kim Jong hacker?
Yeah, very much state-sponsored or sanctioned. I don't know exactly what happens behind the DMZ. But yeah, so the Lazarus Group, or the Guardians of Peace, in November 2014, essentially hacked Sony. They stole about 100 terabytes of data, everything from emails to unreleased movies, HR files, actor contracts, you name it, all because of a movie with Seth Rogen called The Interview, which I actually haven't watched yet.
It's free. Well, I think we should step back a second, because they claim to steal 100 terabytes, which seems like an awful lot over the waxed string internet connection that you have in North Korea. But more than that, the hack allegedly began a year and 2 months before it was known, right? So we learned about it 24th of November 2014. But it sounds like the breach actually had occurred in September
Far
of
earlier.
2013. Right. And so
Yeah.
the 100 terabyte theft is more plausible when you have 14 months to steal it. And it does raise questions. There's lots of questions about this one. So I would say allegedly because of the movie, Seth Rogen's movie, The Interview, because it seems awful odd that you'd have breached them for 14 months before the movie's release, not knowing the movie was even going to be released. Well, I guess maybe they did know, because they hacked them. But
that's probably what triggered it. Like, you hear commonly of state-sponsored actors with incredibly long dwell times in networks, and I don't think it's. I think you could confidently say that let's say Lazarus was inside of the network. They were being quite stealth. They were monitoring to see what was coming out. And then when they realized and looked into the interview, they realized it was a parody of their great leader, then decided to do something about that, which, is very
Well, that's
plausible.
kind of
But
where I was going, right? Like, I think that the reason they hacked them wasn't because of the interview. They hacked them because they
mhm,
hacked them. And when they got in there, they
yeah,
found out about the interview, and it was a convenient trope or an excuse, and maybe to your point, some leverage to try to save themselves from some embarrassment.
yeah. And you might be wondering, well, how could you be inside somebody's network for 12 months undetected? But who knows? That could have been, one or two beacons inside of a network that was, polling out to a command and control server with very little activity that was incredibly difficult to detect. And then when they decided to actually do something about this movie, that's when they decided to laterally move. It looked like they exploited SMB shares or Windows file sharing protocols inside of the network, and from there was able to do quite a lot of damage.
Well, I'm going to inject some snark here because I feel it's my responsibility to
Go
be
for it.
snarky on occasion and say that how would you not notice them for 14 months? You could follow that up with how did you have SQL injection vulnerabilities in 2011? I mean, there's a track record here of not really getting the plot by Sony when it comes to security issues. And how you don't notice them for 14 months is you're not looking. I would posit as another theory. Um, I do think, again, like the bomb threat from our friends at Lizard Squad, there were some genuinely awful possible outcomes of this that I'm not sure everybody caught on to. But as part of the threats related to this, they threatened to actually conduct terror attacks against theaters that aired the movie, the interview, to the point
Hmm.
where the FBI and the Secret Service had to like lock down theaters, and Sony had to go into panic mode about whether to release the film or not. And that's a really nasty outcome or potential outcome from this. Fortunately, there were no terror attacks, but like
Hmm.
that kind of a threat again has serious consequences. And ultimately, it led Sony to releasing the movie for free. I believe it's still available for free on streaming, if I'm not mistaken, which is a weird outcome for somebody who wanted to make it go away. The personal thing that kind of was interesting to me about this is it was kind of the coming out party for APT1 report from Mandiant. Like this was that APT1 report that's kind of paved the way for modern nation state threat reporting. Was published during that same time window. It was released in February of, or had been released in February of 2013, but it was sort of right in line with this idea of outing and talking about nation state threats that Mandiant had sort of paved the road for. And this was just another part of that whole conversation that was sort of new for our industry, right? We didn't talk about that stuff before. And, they published APT1 in February 2013, and then this was only a little over a year later, and it's normalized talking about nation state threats and exposing their TTPs.
Yeah, and it seems to be widely accepted that you can do that now within reason, and we've seen it with a number of different APT crews, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And not that it's going to matter, but as a result of all this, you talked about the Department of Justice in the U.S. being interested in Sabu and others at LulzSec. In September of 2018, the United States did indict Park Jin Hyuk, who was also allegedly behind the WannaCry malware that took down so many organizations with a fake ransomware that was attributed to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And he was indicted for both the Sony breach and the WannaCry malware. And President Obama at the time expressed his disappointment with the situation.
Yeah, well, but again, it's attributed back to a single person, but we know that Lazarus is more than, or Guardians of Peace is more than one person as well. But it's still, to put an indictment out there, it still sends a message to say we know who you are. Because I know some people that are like, well, what's the point of doing indictments if these people, never leave the country that they're in and are safe? And it's like, well, it at least sends a message to say we know who you are. You're not going to go on holidays anytime soon. You won't be emigrating to the US or anywhere else with extradition treaties
No,
either. So it does limit their future as well.
Yeah, I mean, if he ever wins the Super Bowl, he's not going to Disneyland.
Exactly. Um, so after Lazarus Group, where did we end up? Uh, we're back to Lizard Squad, right?
I think we're back to Lizard Squad. I remember this distinctly because the breach at Sony Pictures in 11 sorry, in November. 11 is November. In
Yep.
November of 2014 continued to interrupt my vacation in Hawaii. So that when that event happened in November of 2014 at the end of the month, my wife and I had just arrived in Maui for vacation, and I was doing PR work for my company, responding, to press queries about breaches. And I recall sitting on the beach with my laptop and my Bluetooth headset doing interviews in my Hawaiian shirt about Sony breaches, and I thought it was over. And then on Christmas Day, a large DDoS attack took down the PlayStation Network again, in addition to Xbox Live. So the total, like, impacting about 160 million gamers on Christmas Day with their brand new consoles and video games they wanted to play, um, and interrupting my vacation again.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. Yeah, it's not really fair and quite inconsiderate. Um, at least a good thing for Sony in this case, and Xbox Live as well, was it was a distributed denial of service attack, which is essentially a flood or a rush of traffic to the servers that host these services online. So at least no information was stolen in this particular attack. No accounts were breached or lost or anything else. It was purely just you could not access it. So you get your brand new game on Christmas Day, you go to play it online instead of spend time with your family and have awkward conversations with your family. But you can't because PSN is offline, or the PlayStation Network or Xbox Live was offline as well, which is a bit disappointing.
What was interesting to me was the ransom demands and how this got resolved, right? Like, what Lizard Squad demanded was that their announcement of their attack get 10,000 retweets on Twitter, and then they would stop. And they never got to 10,000 retweets, but and you can't make this stuff up, Ben. Kim.com intervened and offered them 3,000 free mega accounts. Now, why you need 3,000 mega accounts instead of one with 3,000 times the limit, I'm not quite sure. Like, I don't know why you need 3,000 separate mega accounts, but he gave them free Mega Drive accounts in order to stop the DDoS attack. And allegedly, that is why they suspended the attack after about 24 hours.
I didn't know about that component. That is bizarre. Kim.com has actually become very vocal on social media again about other world issues at the moment. So it's interesting his name comes up here. But let's be honest, mega accounts are pretty great for further data exfiltration for future attacks as well. So as a cyber criminal, being offered some mega upload accounts it's not a bad thing.
I mean, the unbreakable Kim. Like, he's just so special. Uh, right. Well, we're kind of winding into the quieter phase of Sony things, and it's starting to feel like perhaps many of these lessons have been taken to heart over at Sony in a little more serious way. On August 21st, 2017, now we're only 9 years ago, or 8.5 even, uh, was their Twitter accounts were breached in essence by a company or a group. They kind of claim to be a company called Our Mine, AUR, or sorry, OUR, Our Mine. It sounds like they're one of these extortion masquerading as a business firms. Like, they claim to be a legitimate business. They hack your stuff. They send you a demand to get your things back and claim that they're a legitimate, a post-paid pen testing service.
Yeah, I don't. There is no way to justify that behavior. Account theft is account theft, and asking for money to get it back is appalling. Like, this is what's crazy. Like, admittedly, shame on Sony. Even in 2017, I say this is poor practice, but they've got social media accounts that are hacked, likely from password reuse. no multi-factor authentication on the account. I'm sure multi-factor authentication was around in 2017, wasn't it, Chet? I'm going to
Absolutely.
say,
Although for a
yeah.
while on Twitter, there was a bit of a flaw where if you had ever enabled SMS 2FA, you couldn't disable
Mhm.
it. So you could enable SMS, and then later on they introduced proper FIDO2 MFA, and you could
Mhm.
add a FIDO2 token, but you couldn't remove the SMS for a while. And so a lot of organizations were vulnerable to SIM swapping, even though they were using better multi-factor because there wasn't any way to disable it.
If there was multi-factor, I couldn't find anything that confirmed that there was multi-factor and if it was
Oh, I doubt
bypassed
there
or if there was a
was.
SIM swap. I'm going to say there wasn't, and it was likely just stolen passwords or password reuse, or password 123 was just the password. So yeah, all in all, it's a little bit embarrassing for a large organization, but the actual impact to their customers is quite minimal, losing social media accounts. Um, is that
I'm
fair to
guessing the
say?
password was PSN rocks.
You're probably right. So I feel like that password was used for something else, wasn't it?
It's funny you say that because I was clearing off some literally old hard drives this afternoon. Like I had a 19-year-old hard drive I was clearing off to destroy. And when I was checking what was on it before I wrecked it, just in case there was something that I thought might want to recover, uh, it was full of password files from password breaches that I'd like torrented. It had the RockU passwords and the LinkedIn passwords, all the old password breaches that I had collected just to test against different password files. And so, yeah, I PSN rocks very well. Along with New York Yankees rule, I think is a very high likelihood that was one of the passwords. Uh,
Yeah,
so Sony remarkably had a 6-year, 1 month and 4-day run after that
yeah.
2017 breach. From what I can tell, no, I've got my timeline out of order. My apologies. A 5-year in 8 months run, still pretty good. I mean, Sony
Yeah,
is
I'm
a
doing the
mega
math in my head.
corporation.
You're
Let's
right. You got close.
let's
You got close.
let's be fair. But like a pretty damn good run without being breached for a while, or at least that we know of,
Yeah.
until on May 28th, 2023, which they didn't know about until June 2nd, 2023. But the actual breach occurred on May 28th, 2023. They were hit
Mhm.
by the Clop ransomware group. And I can attribute zero responsibility to Sony aside from their choice of product in this case. They were using a product called Move It, which is one of these online file sharing appliances, often used by attorneys, accountants, where log into the secure web portal, upload some secret documents, kind of thing. And Sony used this portal, unfortunately for them, to store the personal details of 6,791 U.S. employees of Sony. Uh, it was never released what data was there, but it sounds like it was social security numbers, addresses, phone numbers, that kind of stuff, kind of sensitive stuff. The reason I put Sony off the hook is just to say that that was exploited on their network 3 days before it was known to be a 0 day. So day 0 was 3 days later. So it was a -3 day. Nothing Sony could have done other than not buy that product. They discovered it quickly on June 2nd. So pretty serious improvement on behalf of Sony's security hygiene at that point, despite
Yeah,
another breach.
exactly. Like, I know that we've had many digs today at Sony about potentially doing things poorly, but um, like, were they not supposed to buy this file sharing appliance? You can't buy something and be like, well, I don't want to buy that appliance because it could have future vulnerabilities. That's just not how software works, unfortunately. Um, and Move It is used by so many organizations globally. And I remember when that 0 day first came out, scanning the internet, and you could see how many appliances were actually online and vulnerable, and the number was pretty high. I actually think I was in Brisbane in May 2023 because I vaguely remember talking to you about it by the Brisbane River. Like, this is going to affect a lot of people. So yeah, no shade at Sony there. They couldn't do anything about it. They responded to it quickly. They also notified their staff relatively quickly too about what was lost, and ex-staff as well. So I actually think Sony communicated this really well internally, and dealt with it really well.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll also second endorsing the Brisbane waterfront. As a non-Australian, if you manage to make it to Brisbane, it's not the most exciting town in Australia, I have to say. But if you're in Brisbane, spending some time on the waterfront is time well spent. It's a beautiful parks along both sides of the river, and it is a phenomenal day out. Great food, great beer, great things to do. Highly, highly recommended. Brisbane Tourist Council can send sponsorship money to hosts at securitytake2.com.
Better register that one on PayPal and WePay. So
we're into the final stretch. We got two more to go, Benny. The one that I thought was 6 years and some bit of time, but September 25th, 2023, another Sony breach, right on the heels of their Move It breach, was claimed by a ransomware group called ransomed.vc. They also claim to have totally owned Sony despite only stealing about 6,000 files and 3 gigabytes worth of data, which seems like an awful small amount to totally have owned Sony. What was novel and interesting to me was that people on breach forums claimed that actually ransomed VC wasn't the ones that breached them. They were just claiming it. But more importantly this was the advent of trying to weaponize regulation. This was the first time I can remember a threat group, in this case Ransomed, saying, we are GDPR compliant, and because we've stolen this data, you are not GDPR compliant. If you don't pay a ransom, we're going to report you to the data protection authorities in the European Union.
Look, it's not a bad extortion strategy. But yeah, I don't think we've seen anything like that previous. And it's worth noting too, like the EU, their fines and are pretty severe. It's not just a slap on the wrist if you are found to be non-compliant. So I could actually see lawyers sitting down and having a discussion like, what do we do here? Do we pay the ransom? Because it could be a lot cheaper than having to deal with not just the legal proceedings, but then the costs of GDPR violation as well, which are astronomical. They can be up to a certain percentage of revenue, up to like $2 billion or something like that.
But what about the other side? That's what I'm thinking. So what if I am the data protection authority in Germany and a criminal has reported data not being protected because they stole it? Do I really prosecute that?
I could see the EU doing that. I know it's a stretch. I wouldn't be surprised to see the EU do that. They've taken,
of course, the data was also stolen in Japan, and the data was only Japanese, so there was no GDPR jurisdiction in this case.
Actually, that's a good point. Yeah, it was a test server in Japan, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like if this happened in the future and it was relevant to EU users, I could absolutely see the EU going after an organization, regardless of whether the report comes from a cyber criminal, an end user, or a legal authority.
Well, if any of our listeners are members of the European Parliament or have any opinions on this to share with us, I'd be fascinated to find out if there's a policy on how to handle this situation, because it's also come up after this incident, unrelated to Sony, related to some SEC filings and things that organizations are required to make now that criminals have also made threats about. And honestly, if I were a regulator, I'm not sure how I would respond to that situation, because you do not want to incent criminals to intentionally breach organizations to prove their non-compliance. Like, this is not a behavior that society wants to encourage, but we do want compliance, right? And it's a tough call.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just to be clear, so Sony said that it was an internal test server that was hosted in Japan. They took it offline, and they claimed that there was actually no legitimate data on that server whatsoever, which is probably why, like, reading articles on this one, there wasn't a whole lot that seemed to come out of it at all from a legal perspective. There's no arrest made for it either that I could find. So all in all, it kind of turned out to be a bit of a fizzle anyway, I think, from a ransom VC perspective.
Well, that was why I thought the GDPR claim was particularly bizarre, because there was no European data. And in fact, it doesn't even look like there was hardly any data.
Maybe that was
really
the whole
weird
play.
one.
They're
to be
like,
making
okay,
that kind of claim.
maybe that was the whole point. Is they were like, we have nothing here, but it is a large organization. Let's try and hold them over a barrel in the most creative way possible. They probably asked ChatGPT for their assistance back in 2023, and that's the angle that they got.
Yeah, perhaps. Well, let's wrap up with one that does beg the question of whether Sony's learned their lessons or not. And that may be controversial. I'm not sure if you agree with that opinion, but I've never been afraid to be a little bold with my thoughts. On January 1st, 2026, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, not very long ago, the PS5 ROM keys were allegedly published on the internet. I say allegedly in that I've intentionally not acquired stolen intellectual property that has a very litigious nature to it. But I read a lot of stories about people spreading screenshots of said keys on Twitter, or X as it's called now. And we're not talking like a random signing key that can be revoked. We're talking about the mother load, from what I've read, like the key that signs the first stage bootloader. So in essence, what you would call the root key of a chain of keys, right? Like you always have this chain of keys, no different than we have in the TLS system that signs web certificates, software certificates, etc. In this case, the hardware is burned with a master public key that says don't load any software that's not signed by this key or one of its subordinates. And that's the key that was allegedly leaked on January 1st, 2026. That would achieve what you might call full jailbreak or root access to all PS5s that are in the field, because that certificate's burned into every device. There's no way to change it. And the reason I say it raises questions about Sony is like nothing bad's been done with it yet. Clearly, it could enable mass piracy. It could enable awesome things like amazing homebrew software to run on PS5s. There's all kinds of danger there. I mean, if Sony detects you doing it, you're probably going to face a lifetime ban of your device from the PlayStation Network. But to me, as a security professional, the reason I raise this question is that key shouldn't be stealable. Like, if I miss something here, like if I'm Microsoft and I have a master Xbox key, and I'm Sony and I have a master PlayStation key, and God forbid we go back to our Sega Saturn or something, and we've got a master Sega Saturn key, I'm storing that in an HSM, am I not? A hardware security module for folks that aren't as nerdy in security space as we are, but like a device that is a one-way situation, which is you store a private key inside the thing and it cannot be extracted, or should not be extractable if it doesn't have vulnerabilities. And
yeah, I was going to say, it shouldn't be extractable from the device itself, right? So, not unless you've got some incredible way to do hardware hacking and sniff it across one of the buses itself. But yeah, you're right. Like, this had to have come from somebody internally, I would think, at Sony.
Well, you say steal it from a bus. That's not possible either, or shouldn't be, because the device itself that you have in your home, the PlayStation 5, only has the public key. It doesn't have the private key. So the private key theoretically should only exist in an HSM, like in some magic vault in Tokyo. And
you're right. And
like
no,
there should be like 4 people with 4 different keys that all have to put them in and turn them at the same time, like the nuclear launch codes, to gain access to the private key to sign stuff. And in which case they don't get the private key. They just get to sign it.
Yeah. So
if this key has truly been stolen, it means it was not stored in an HSM, is what I posit.
Yeah, and whoever accesses it, I'm assuming it's not audited either. Otherwise, I'd know exactly who it is. Or maybe they do, which is why there has been no further news for, a good month on this particular subject. So, I don't know. This is truly bizarre, but it raises a lot of questions. And again, this is completely unpatchable. So any PlayStations made before January 2026 will always be able to run potentially pirated software.
This is all alleging that the leaks were true. Like, because we do not possess the key, And we have not used that key to sign software to run on a PlayStation. We do not know that this is true, in
Well,
fairness.
it's interesting because I do a lot of hardware hacking and playing with it, and like on Reddit, for example, there's a number of different hardware mods and hacking subreddits, and none of them are sharing screenshots about what they've been able to achieve. So whether it's true or not, I guess, yeah, that still begs the question. You would think that people would have jumped straight on top of this and people would be sharing what they've done quite openly and proudly once they've got access to the key, which they haven't done yet. Time will tell.
So we'll leave this one open, I think, but I see two sides to that, right? Like the layers of security within the firmware of a device like the PlayStation and the amount of effort that Microsoft and Sony and others in this space have put into DRM would suggest that just because you have the key, it might take you a significant amount of time to abuse it in a way to do anything useful. And so it's very possible it is a real key, and that because the level of knowledge required to abuse that key is so high that there's a few individuals in the world that know how to do it and they haven't figured it out yet or haven't published it. And I think that's a real possibility. It's also a possibility the whole story's bogus.
Yeah, like I'm on the PS5 homebrew forum, subreddit now, and there doesn't seem to be great progress in any direction. So I would say there is a very good chance it is bogus, but yeah, time will tell.
Generate random 256 character hexadecimal stream, publish as key.
You going with that?
I mean, I don't know, honestly. I really don't know. I've always been fascinated by this topic, and maybe it's a separate podcast, or maybe I should just keep it for when I'm at the pub with my friends. But the idea of those master keys to sign things for Xbox or PlayStation, I've always envisaged to be like a druid ritual of accessing those kinds of keys because of how centrally important they are to preventing abuse of the platform. And I'd like to think that that's true, but I've also witnessed how software is developed in real software companies for the last 40 years and recognized that you generally don't want to see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Distributed software engineering is difficult. Different environments, different runtimes. Who actually knows? You'd need to speak to a Sony developer that's actually been building the firmware for the PS5 to actually know how that sausage is made as well. It would be a pretty well kept secret, I dare say.
Well, time will tell. Like, we'll either see hacked PS5s in a year or two, or we won't. And we'll find out with everyone else. On that note, I think we've spent enough time on our dear friends over at Sony. Please forgive us. We've tried to do our best to faithfully represent what happened. And if you have any corrections, we're more than happy to share your side of the story. On that, we'll wrap up this episode of Security Take Two. As always, like, you can get our episodes at our website, find out how to contact us, etc. at securitytake2.com. And you can email us at hosts@securitytake2.com, spelled out. And we still have the Reddit going, Benny?
We do. So if you want to ask us any questions, you'll find me over on Reddit at reddit.com/r/securitytake2.